Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations.
When King Charles came out for his speech at Westminster Abbey, everyone believed it would be a normal royal moment. The crowd expected him to honor tradition, to finally acknowledge Prince William as the next heir to the throne. But the heir shifted. In a shocking turn, Charles lifted the crown not for his son, but for Catherine. Gasps were heard through the hall as she was crowned queen during this explosive moment. Why would Charles choose his daughter-in-law over his own blood? And what storm would this daring act unleash upon the monarchy? Now, as the new reign begins, no one expected what came next. The twist no one imagined would happen. The grand hall of Westminster Abbey shimmered with light from golden chandeliers. Rows of officials, royals, and foreign guests filled the space, their eyes fixed on the throne. Cameras from every corner of the world captured each detail, sending it live to millions watching from their homes. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that makes hearts beat faster. Everyone believed they knew what was about to happen. King Charles walked to the center, dressed in full regalia. His crown reflected the light, his robes trailing behind him. He paused, raised his hand, and began to speak. His voice carried across the hall, steady yet filled with a weight that silenced even the whispers. He spoke of unity, of the need for the monarchy to stand strong in a changing world. His words painted a picture of a nation in need of a leader who could hold it together with grace and resolve. Then came the moment no one expected. Instead of reaffirming Prince William as his heir, Charles turned toward Catherine. His hand lifted, carrying the crown meant for kings. The hall gasped as he placed it upon her head, declaring her queen in her own right. For a heartbeat, silence gripped the room. Shock froze the faces of guests and even the clergy. Catherine stood still, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had not prepared for this moment. Her lips trembled slightly as though she wished to speak but could not find the words. She lowered her gaze, unsure whether to step back or accept what was happening. Prince William remained beside her, his face calm but pale. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed forward, giving no sign of anger, yet the strain showed. He did not move, did not protest, but the truth was clear in his expression. His father's choice had shaken him deeply. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, some whispered, and others stared in stunned silence. Beyond the Abbey walls, television screens and radios carried the news across the world. Millions sat in disbelief. Inside the Abbey, history had been rewritten in a single gesture. The crown now rested on Catherine's head, and the future of the monarchy had been placed in her hands. But why had Charles done this? And what would follow within the palace walls once the ceremony ended? Whispers inside the palace. The coronation ended, but the shock did not fade as the royal family returned to Buckingham Palace. The heavy doors closed behind them, shutting out the cheers and confusion of the crowd, leaving only a tense silence within the gilded halls. Every step sounded louder than usual, and every glance carried questions no one dared ask aloud. Advisors gathered in corners, whispering in low voices. Courtiers hurried back and forth, carrying papers and messages, their faces pale with disbelief. Senior staff exchanged anxious looks, each trying to guess what the king's decision truly meant. The palace, usually a place of order, now felt unsettled, like the air before a storm. Catherine retreated to a quiet chamber. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she rested them on her lap. The crown felt heavy on her head, heavier than she had ever imagined. She thought of William, of how this moment had belonged to him. The question swirled in her heart. Why me? Why now? She wanted to pull the crown away, yet something inside her told her that the choice had been sealed in front of the world. Meanwhile, in other rooms, discussions grew heated. Some aides whispered that Charles had acted with vision, seeing in Catherine a calmness and strength that could steady the monarchy for years to come. Others argued in anger, calling the move reckless, a betrayal of tradition and unfair to William, who had waited his entire life for his place. The divide spread quickly. Traditionalists clung to the belief that the crown should pass directly from father to son. Modern voices countered, saying Catherine's intelligence, warmth, and ability to connect with people could revive the monarchy in ways no one else could. William walked through the corridors quietly, his face unreadable. Every staff member who saw him lowered their head, unsure whether to speak. Though he remained silent, his presence carried a weight that pressed on everyone around him. He did not complain, but his stillness said more than words ever could. But truly, did he stay quiet? William's silent conflict. The palace was still alive with whispers long after the ceremony ended, but William carried his silence like armor. He walked slowly through the corridors, his steps firm, his shoulders upright, his face calm. To everyone who looked at him, he appeared steady, even proud. Yet inside, his heart carried a weight too heavy to name. The crown that had rested on Catherine's head still burned in his mind. For years, he had prepared himself for the moment he would take his place as heir. It had been spoken of since his childhood, repeated through lessons, through tradition, through every watchful eye that followed him as the son of a future king. And now, in one breath, his father had placed it on another. He loved his wife deeply. Catherine was not just his partner, but the center of his family, the mother of his children, and the quiet strength in his life. To see her crowned should have filled him with pride, yet the feeling was twisted. He did not envy her, but the truth of what he had lost pressed against him. He felt as though his role had been stolen, yet he could not show anger toward her. His loyalty to her remained unshaken, but his heart wrestled with betrayal. At night, as the palace halls dimmed, William sat alone in his private room. He stared at the framed photographs of his children, his father, his late mother. He thought of the path they had all walked, of duty pressed into his hands since boyhood. His fear was not only for himself but for the image of the monarchy. If he showed weakness, if he broke in front of the world, everything could crumble. When Catherine entered, their eyes met in silence. She said nothing, but her expression told him she carried the same storm inside. There were no words strong enough to cover the space between them. Instead, a hand resting on his shoulder, a glance shared across the room, became their only language. Not being able to bear it all, Catherine made the quiet decision to speak to King Charles in private about the incident. But did she really want to reject the crown, or was this move out of pity for William? Catherine's private conversation with Charles. The meeting was arranged in silence behind the thick walls of Buckingham Palace. Catherine was led into a small chamber, its tall windows covered by heavy curtains. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the polished table where King Charles sat waiting. His crown and robes were gone, replaced with a simple suit, but the weight of his presence lingered in the air. Catherine entered with hesitant steps, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her voice was soft but firm as she broke the silence, staring that it should have been William, her eyes lowering before she dared to lift them toward him. Charles leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady on her face. He did not raise his voice, but every word carried with it the gravity of a decision he had thought through for years. He spoke of the monarchy, of its fragile state in a world that no longer looked at crowns with reverence. He said the people needed someone they trusted, someone who could carry them forward without fear. He told her that his choice was not made out of disregard for William, but out of concern. William, he explained, had always carried duty with dignity but also with reluctance. He feared that the burden would weigh too heavily on his son, draining him of the warmth needed to inspire loyalty. Catherine, he said, had already shown the balance of grace and strength, the same balance that had made his own mother, Queen Elizabeth, a figure of unwavering faith. Catherine listened in silence, her heart torn in two. She thought of William, standing alone with his quiet pain, and she thought of the crown that now sat heavy upon her head. Her love for her husband clashed with the duty that had been placed upon her shoulders without her choice. When Catherine finally rose to leave, her steps were slow, her thoughts unsettled. She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging him, but her eyes betrayed the conflict within. As the door closed behind her, she carried the weight of two worlds, her loyalty to her husband, and the duty her father-in-law had thrust upon her. But how would the other royals react when whispers turned into voices and discontent began to spread through the family itself? The reactions of the royals. Inside the palace, silence had given way to voices, and those voices soon rose into sharp tones. The first to break through was Princess Anne. She stood firmly before her brother, her eyes sharp, her words cutting through the heavy air. She reminded Charles of duty, of centuries of tradition, of the clear line of succession that had guided the crown from one generation to the next. Her voice carried not only disapproval but a deep sense of betrayal. To her, this was not vision, it was disruption, and she wanted her brother to understand the gravity of what he had done. Charles listened quietly, his face unreadable, but Anne's words never left, even after she left. In another wing of the palace, Prince Edward and his wife Sophie spoke in hushed tones. They had always been careful, choosing steady ground instead of open conflict, but even they could not ignore the unease spreading through the family. Edward feared the fracture it could cause among them. Sophie worried about the world beyond the palace walls, about the people's reaction, and whether this choice would weaken or strengthen the monarchy's fragile bond with the public. Camilla, meanwhile, carried her own storm. Though she had long accepted her place as queen consort, the decision left her shaken. She had stood beside Charles through years of criticism, years of waiting for recognition, yet now she felt pushed aside. Catherine's sudden rise made her question whether her role would fade into the shadows. To her, the crown on Catherine's head was not just unexpected, it was a wound. Far from the palace, Prince Harry heard the news and felt a weight he could not shake. Though distance had grown between him and his brother, sorrow filled his heart for William. He remembered the promises they once shared as boys, the thought that they would carry the crown together, side by side, even if in different ways. Now, William stood alone, and Harry's heart ached for him. Meghan, observing with careful eyes, saw something else. To her, Catherine's new role might reshape everything: the monarchy's image, its future, even its connection to the modern world. She wondered if Catherine's gentle nature and strong presence could soften centuries of distance between the crown and the people. Across the extended family, the reactions were divided. Some royal cousins whispered words of hope, believing Catherine's popularity could heal old wounds. Others grew bitter, feeling that tradition had been abandoned, that the line of succession had been broken in full view of the world. The palace, once united in formality, now carried cracks that ran deep. Some voices urged caution, others pushed for change, but all agreed on one truth. The decision had shaken the royal family to its core. But how would the people outside the palace walls respond when the news spread through streets, homes, and screens across the world? Public, unexpected reactions. The moment Catherine's crown touched her head, the world outside began to stir. Within hours, television stations cut into regular programming. Headlines flashed across screens, radio presenters interrupted songs, and online platforms flooded with breaking alerts. The news traveled faster than the tolling of bells, reaching every corner of the globe. In London, crowds swarmed outside Buckingham Palace. Some carried flags, waving them proudly as they cheered her name. They shouted in joy, seeing in her a fresh beginning, a face they already trusted. To them, Catherine's rise was a chance for renewal, a moment that carried the late Queen's steady grace. But not all voices were joyful. Others demanded answers, pressing against barriers, calling out that tradition had been broken. They asked why William had been passed over, why centuries of certainty had been set aside in a single moment. Their chants rose above the cheers, creating a sound that shook with division. Around the world, newspapers ran bold headlines. Supporters praised Charles for daring to move the monarchy into a new age. They called his choice bold, even visionary, pointing to Catherine's humility and calm strength as the future of the crown. Yet critics filled the air with doubt. They accused him of tearing apart a system that had lasted through wars and storms, of destabilizing what was meant to remain untouched. Polls began to emerge within days. Numbers shifted like tides, showing a nation split in two. Some backed Catherine with full hearts, seeing her as a queen who could bring people closer. Others clung tightly to tradition, their trust shaken, their faith in the crown tested. Through it all, Catherine's image touched the ordinary people. Her quiet smile, her steady manner, the way she carried herself with no show of pride, all of it drew warmth from those who wanted to believe in her. In the streets, in shops, in homes, her name became part of everyday conversations. Families debated at dinner tables, neighbors argued at bus stops, voices filled with both hope and fear. The Commonwealth, too, began to stir. Leaders in faraway countries spoke cautiously, weighing whether this shift would affect their ties to the crown. Some praised it as progress, others hesitated, questioning whether their loyalty to the monarchy should remain. Outside the palace gates, flowers and signs piled high. Some bore words of support for Catherine, others carried messages of protest. The crowd reflected the nation itself, divided, uncertain, and yet unable to turn away. In every corner, from city streets to small villages, one truth was clear. The world had not only witnessed a coronation, it had stepped into uncharted waters. But what was stirring inside Harry's heart as he wrestled with old wounds and new feelings for his brother's silent pain? Harry's reflections and William's burden. The news of Catherine's unexpected crown reached Harry across the ocean. He sat in quiet thought, away from the cameras, away from the noise. For a long time, he said nothing, only staring out of the window as memories of childhood drifted back. The last time he had seen such shock in William's eyes was after their mother's passing. He remembered the way duty had pressed on them even then, too young to carry such weight. Harry's heart ached for his brother, despite the distance between them. Their relationship had been strained, pulled apart by choices, words, and the glare of public life. Yet beneath it all, he still felt the bond of shared pain. He knew what it meant to live under expectation, to feel unseen, and to carry the burden of history. He whispered to himself that William did not deserve to be pushed aside like this. In London, William walked through the halls with a calm face, his expression steady before every eye. Yet inside, he carried a storm. He felt betrayed, confused, and unsure of his place. Every portrait on the palace walls seemed to remind him of the crown that had always been meant for him, and yet it now sat on his wife's head. Behind closed doors, William allowed himself brief moments of release. He confided in no one, but carried his pain quietly. He did not wish to show cracks, not to his father, not to Catherine, and not to the public who watched his every step. But in silence, he questioned what his role had become. When the two brothers finally spoke, it was not before cameras. Harry's words were gentle, filled with empathy. He told William that he understood, that he knew the shadow of duty could choke even the strongest spirit. William listened, his jaw tight, his eyes heavy. He said little, only allowing the faintest glimpse of his sorrow. Harry longed to ease the weight, but he knew he could not return to royal life. His path was different now. He stood on the edge, neither fully in nor fully out, watching a family he both loved and resented. He wondered if Catherine's reign would draw them together again, or if it would drive the wedge deeper. In his quiet moments, Harry admitted he admired Catherine's strength, but he feared what her crown would mean for William's soul. Would this new order heal their broken family, or would it fracture them forever? But as Catherine adjusted her crown and began her first steps into power, one question remained. Could she carry this weight without breaking the ties that held the monarchy together? Catherine's steps into power. The first days after the coronation were heavy for Catherine. She rose each morning unsure if she was living in a dream or stepping into a life she had never chosen. The crown weighed more than its gold. It carried whispers of doubt, the eyes of the world, and the shadow of William's silence. At first, she moved carefully, speaking only when required, choosing her words with care. But soon, she began to shape her voice. Catherine outlined her vision quietly, then more firmly. She spoke of reforms, of a monarchy closer to the people, one that listened instead of only watching. Her heart leaned toward compassion, her thoughts on young families, children, and those often overlooked. Her style was steady, calm, and graceful, reminding many of Queen Elizabeth II. But Catherine carried something different. She was warmer, more open, and she allowed people to feel closer to her. At small gatherings, she spoke softly with mothers, smiled with children, and listened to the elderly. Each moment built trust. Each gesture made her crown seem lighter in the eyes of the people. She began to introduce changes in royal routines. Some were simple, such as easing certain traditions that kept a distance between the royals and the public. Others were bolder, aimed at drawing younger generations closer to the monarchy. Her choices sparked debate. Some saw renewal, others saw danger to the old order. Yet Catherine pressed forward. She believed that if the monarchy was to survive, it had to change. And though she carried the title reluctantly, she carried it with care. Every speech, every step, was shaped with thought. She knew the eyes of the world were waiting to see if she would stumble. In her private hours, Catherine still wrestled with doubt. She looked at William and saw the pain he tried to hide. She felt the distance growing between them, a silence that words could not always bridge. She wore the crown, but in her heart, she still wished it had been his. But as weeks passed, the world began to look at her differently. Some saw her as a beacon, a figure who could bring new life to a fading tradition. Others doubted her strength. Yet Catherine stood, her shoulders straight, her voice steady. The crown had not been her choice, but it had become her path. And slowly, step by step, it began to reshape not only her future, but her very identity. Would the world accept Catherine as their queen in her own right? Or would the shadow of tradition rise again to challenge her reign? The future of the monarchy. The crown had been placed on Catherine's head, but the questions that followed refused to rest. In grand halls and private homes, in newspapers and on television screens, a debate began that seemed to stretch across the entire nation. If Catherine were queen in her own right, what would this mean for the children who had always been seen as the next in line? Prince George, only a boy yet already carrying the careful composure of someone born to duty, was spoken of as the natural heir. His face, so often caught by cameras during public events, now carried a new kind of attention. People studied his gestures, his shy smiles, his still-developing confidence, as though they might find in them a glimpse of the king he would become one day. For many, George was the answer to the question of the monarchy's future. But in hushed conversations, another name began to rise: Princess Charlotte. The young girl, lively and self-assured, was remembered for her boldness and her sharp eyes. Observers pointed out her steady way of carrying herself, even at such a young age. Some said she had the spark of leadership that could, in time, grow into something remarkable. In a world where Catherine herself had broken tradition, Charlotte's name floated in the air as a possibility no longer unthinkable. Even further down the line, imaginations ran wild. Writers speculated about a day when George might marry, perhaps choosing a wife who could become another powerful queen in her own right. The thought of a monarchy led not only by kings but by strong queens stirred excitement and unease in equal measure. The crown, once bound so tightly to rules of inheritance, now seemed open to a future shaped by choice and circumstance. Historians added fuel to the fire. They drew comparisons to the past, pointing to Elizabeth I, who had ruled with unmatched independence, and Elizabeth II, who had guided the nation through decades of change. Catherine's sudden rise was seen as another turning point, one that could reshape the line of succession for generations. Was the crown entering an age where women might play a more central role than ever before? Still, alongside the excitement ran a current of doubt. Some questioned whether Catherine's reign was meant to last or whether it was only a pause in the line. Would William eventually step into the role, or would George inherit directly after his mother? The uncertainty left the monarchy floating in a space where tradition no longer offered clear answers. Inside palace walls, the silence on these matters spoke louder than words. George and Charlotte, still children, laughed and played, unaware of the weight already being imagined for their futures. Yet those around them, Courtiers, historians, and even members of the family could not help but look at them differently now. Every gesture seemed to carry meaning, every smile read as a sign of what might be to come. For the people, the picture was equally divided. Some embraced the idea of a monarchy shaped by women, inspired by Catherine's calm strength and Charlotte's potential. Others clung tightly to tradition, fearing that too much change might weaken the throne itself. It was as though the nation was looking into a foggy horizon, unsure of where the path would lead. The monarchy, long known for certainty and clear succession, now carried a sense of unpredictability. The future was no longer carved in stone, but written in shifting sands. Catherine's crown was secure on her head, yet beyond her, the line stretched into mystery. And so the question lingered, whispered everywhere from Parliament to the streets. Would this be the dawn of a new dynasty shaped by queens, or the beginning of uncertainty that might one day shake the crown itself? A new era, or a risky gamble? When the crown touched Catherine's head, Charles's choice sent a shock through every corner of the kingdom. The act itself had been brief, lasting only minutes, but the echoes would carry for years to come. Across the world, voices rose in fierce contrast, and the monarchy found itself at the center of a storm. For some, Charles's decision was nothing short of visionary. They saw in him a king who had dared to step outside the strict boundaries of tradition, a man who recognized the need for a monarchy that could reflect the changing world. Supporters called it bold, even brave, to place Catherine on the throne, believing her warmth and intelligence could guide the institution into a new age. But not everyone agreed. Critics sharpened their words, accusing Charles of recklessness. They spoke of betrayal, of a rupture in the chain of succession that had always been the crown's strength. To them, the act was not courage but carelessness, a gamble that might weaken the monarchy beyond repair. Amidst the noise, Catherine herself stood quietly, her composure steady. She had not sought this role, yet now she bore it with calm grace. Each public appearance was studied, every word she spoke measured against the enormous expectations pressing upon her. The crown weighed heavily, but with time she began to carry it with growing confidence. Step by step, she transformed from the hesitant figure on Coronation Day into a queen who could command attention without raising her voice. Beside her, William remained the silent strength of the story. He walked faithfully by her side, his hand sometimes guiding hers, his presence unshaken. Yet beneath his calm, his heart carried a burden that no one could truly see. He supported Catherine without question, but the loss of his own place in the line of succession cut deeply. His silence was both a shield and a wound, visible only to those who knew him best. In homes, schools, and workplaces, the debates raged on. Was this the birth of a new era, or the risk of a fractured throne? Crowds outside Buckingham Palace reflected the same divide, some cheering, some demanding answers, all caught in the drama of a monarchy that no longer felt predictable. Charles himself seemed untouched by the storm. He carried the look of a man who had made his choice with full knowledge of its consequences. For his supporters, he would be remembered as the king who saw beyond tradition and chose vision over safety. For his critics, his name would stand as a warning of what happens when the old order is broken. History had not yet decided which of these truths would endure. Catherine pressed forward, William stood beside her, and the monarchy balanced between renewal and risk. As the years stretched ahead, one question remained heavy in the air, one that no one could yet answer. Would Charles be remembered as the reckless king who fractured the monarchy, or the one who gave it a future?